The venom burned like liquid fire through Orla Nightshade's veins, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die alone in this God-forsaken wheat field under the merciless afternoon sun. She had been walking the perimeter of the farm she had been working on for the past 3 weeks, checking the fences for breaks where the wild boars had been getting through, when the snake had struck without warning from beneath a rotted fence post. The fangs had sunk deep into her calf muscle, and even through her thick orc skin, she had felt the immediate burn of poison entering her bloodstream. She had managed to stumble perhaps 20 yards before her leg gave out entirely, and now she lay in the dirt between rows of golden wheat, her vision already starting to blur at the edges as sweat poured down her green face and soaked into her rough work clothes. The farm belonged to humans, of course, and she was just hired labor, the kind of orc they would tolerate during harvest season when they needed strong backs, and did not ask too many questions about where those backs came from. She had been cast out from her clan 6 months ago for refusing to participate in a raid on a human settlement, and since then she had been drifting from farm to farm, taking whatever work she could find and keeping her head down. Nobody here would mourn her. Nobody would even notice she was missing until tomorrow morning when she failed to show up for work, and by then the carrion birds would already be picking at her corpse. She tried to move, tried to drag herself toward the farmhouse that she could see in the distance like a mirage shimmering in the heat, but her limbs felt like they were made of stone. The puncture wounds in her calf were swelling rapidly, the flesh around them turning an ugly purple-black that stood out starkly against her green skin. Her breathing was coming in short, desperate gasps now, and she could feel her heart hammering irregularly in her chest like a drum with a broken head. Through the haze of pain and approaching unconsciousness, she heard footsteps crunching through the dry wheat stalks. Heavy boots, moving fast. A shadow fell across her face, blocking out the harsh sunlight, and she forced her eyes to focus on the figure standing over her. A human man, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark brown hair that fell to his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. She recognized him vaguely as Declan Fisher, the owner's son, though she had never spoken to him directly. He was staring down at her with an expression of pure horror. "Snake," she managed to gasp out, her tusks making the word sound more like a growl. "Venom." He dropped to his knees beside her without hesitation, his hands moving to her leg, and she wanted to warn him not to touch her, that orc blood was dangerous, that he should just leave her here to die rather than risk contamination. But the words would not come. He was already examining the wound, his face grim and focused. "Copperhead," he said, more to himself than to her. "Big one from the look of these fang marks." Before she could process what he was doing, he had pulled a knife from his belt and was cutting away the fabric of her trouser leg, exposing the swollen, discolored flesh. Then he bent his head down, placed his mouth directly over the puncture wounds, and began to suck. The shock of it broke through even the fog of venom clouding her mind. A human, putting his mouth on orc flesh, drawing her poisoned blood into his own body. It was unthinkable. It was insane. She tried to push him away, but her arms would not obey her, would only flop uselessly at her sides. He spat blood and venom onto the ground, the mixture dark and viscous, then bent his head again. Over and over he repeated the process, sucking and spitting, his lips and chin becoming stained with her blood. She could see the muscles in his jaw working, could hear the wet sounds of him drawing the poison from her wound. It seemed to go on forever, each second stretching into an eternity of pain and confusion, and something else she could not quite name. Finally he sat back, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, leaving a smear of green across his tanned skin. "That is all I can do here," he said, his voice rough. "I need to get you back to the house. This is going to hurt." He did not wait for her response before scooping her up in his arms like she weighed nothing, though she was tall and heavily muscled and no lightweight by any measure. She made a sound of protest that came out as more of a whimper, hating her own weakness, hating that a human was carrying her like an invalid. But there was no strength left in her body to fight, and so she let her head fall against his chest as he strode through the wheat field toward the distant farmhouse, each step jostling her injured leg and sending fresh waves of agony through her system. The farmhouse was larger up close than it had seemed from a distance, a sturdy two-story structure of whitewashed wood with a deep porch that wrapped around three sides. Declan carried her up the steps and through the front door without breaking stride, calling out as he went, "Ma, I need clean water and bandages now." A woman appeared from what must have been the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes going wide when she saw what her son was carrying. "Merciful gods, is that the orc girl from the south field? What happened? Snakebite. Copperhead." "I got most of the venom out, but she needs treatment." The woman, who had the same dark hair and gray eyes as her son, hesitated for just a moment, and in that moment Orla saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. An orc brought into their home, the scandal of it, the danger. But then the woman's expression hardened into something resolute, and she nodded. "Upstairs, the guest room. I will bring what you need." Declan carried Orla up a narrow staircase and into a small but clean bedroom with whitewashed walls and a simple wooden bed frame. He laid her down on the quilt carefully, propping her injured leg up on a pillow. The movement made her gasp, and she bit down hard on her lower lip to keep from crying out, feeling one of her small tusks cut into the tender flesh. "Easy," he said quietly. "You are safe now. Safe." The word was almost laughable. She was an orc in a human home, her body failing, completely at their mercy. But when she looked up at his face, she saw nothing but genuine concern in those storm-gray eyes, and something in her chest twisted painfully. His mother returned with an armload of supplies. A basin of clean water, strips of white cloth for bandages, a brown glass bottle that Orla recognized as carbolic acid for disinfecting, and several small clay jars whose contents she could only guess at. The woman set everything down on the bedside table and then stood back, her arms crossed over her chest. "I will leave you to it then," she said stiffly. "Your father will be back from town before supper. He will want to know about this." "I know, Ma, thank you." After his mother left, closing the door behind her with a soft click, Declan turned his attention back to Orla. He dipped one of the cloth strips into the water and began to clean the blood and dirt from around the snake bite, his touch surprisingly gentle for such large hands. She watched him work, too exhausted to do anything else, studying the concentration on his face as he tended to her wound. "Why did you help me?" The question came out as barely more than a whisper, her throat dry and tight. He glanced up at her, then back down at his work. "Because you needed help. I am an orc, I noticed. Your people hate mine." "Some do," he acknowledged. He uncorked the bottle of carbolic acid and she braced herself, knowing what was coming. "This is going to sting." Sting was a vast understatement. The disinfectant poured over the open wounds felt like he had set her leg on fire all over again. And this time, she could not stop the cry that tore from her throat. Her hands clenched in the quilt beneath her, claws that she had filed down to be less threatening digging into the fabric. He murmured apologies as he worked, cleaning the bite thoroughly before applying what smelled like a poultice of herbs and honey to the wound, and then wrapping it in clean bandages. "My grandmother taught me this," he said as he worked. Plantain and comfrey to draw out any remaining poison, honey to prevent infection. It works on snake bites if you catch them quick enough. You should not have put your mouth on me, she said, the words coming out harsher than she intended. Orc blood is dangerous to humans. He tied off the bandage and sat back, meeting her eyes directly. Orc blood is just blood. The venom was the dangerous part. She wanted to argue with him, to tell him that he was wrong, that orcs were monstrous and their very essence was corrupt. At least that was what every human she had ever encountered seemed to believe. But the room was spinning now, exhaustion and the aftereffects of the venom pulling her down into darkness, and she did not have the strength for arguments. "Rest," he said, and his voice seemed to come from very far away. "I will check on you in a few hours." She tried to tell him that she should not be here, that she should be in the barn with the animals where orcs belonged. But unconsciousness claimed her before the words could form. When she woke, it was dark outside the window and a single candle burned on the bedside table, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Her leg throbbed with a dull, persistent ache that was somehow more bearable than the acute agony of before. She turned her head carefully and found Declan sitting in a wooden chair beside the bed, his head tipped back against the wall, eyes closed. He had changed his clothes, she noticed, the blood-stained shirt replaced with a clean one of rough homespun. But there were dark circles under his eyes and his face was drawn with fatigue. As if sensing her gaze, his eyes opened and he sat forward immediately. "You are awake. How do you feel?" "Like I was bitten by a snake and then carried a mile by a human," she said, and was surprised to hear a trace of dry humor in her own voice. The corner of his mouth quirked up in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Fair enough. Can you drink something? You need water." He helped her sit up, propping pillows behind her back, and held a cup of cool water to her lips. She drank greedily, not realizing until that moment how parched she had been, and he refilled the cup twice more before she finally waved it away. "What time is it?" she asked. "Just past midnight." "You have been out for about 8 hours. You stayed here the whole time," he shrugged. "Someone needed to make sure you did not take a turn for the worse. Snake bite victims can have delayed reactions, especially with the amount of venom you took." She studied him in the candlelight, this human who had saved her life for no reason she could fathom. He was younger than she had first thought, probably no more than 25 or 26, with a strong jaw that was dark with stubble and hands that bore the calluses of hard physical labor. There was a kindness in his face that she was not accustomed to seeing directed at her. "Your father," she said carefully. "Your mother said he would want to know about this. Will there be trouble?" Declan sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "My father is a practical man. He knows we need workers for the harvest. As long as you can still work once you heal, he will not make an issue of it. But he would prefer I not be sleeping in his guest room. He would prefer a lot of things. The world rarely arranges itself according to my father's preferences." There was an edge to his voice that suggested old conflicts, well-worn arguments. "I should go back to the workers' quarters in the barn once I can walk. You will stay here until I am satisfied that you are recovered enough to move safely. Doctor's orders. You are not a doctor." "No, but I am the closest thing we have out here on the frontier. I have set bones, delivered calves, and treated more snake bites than I care to count. You will stay." There was a note of command in his voice that made her want to bristle, to assert that he could not order her around, but the truth was that she had nowhere else to go and no strength to get there even if she did. So, instead, she settled back against the pillows and nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for saving my life." He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing across his face. "You are welcome. Now try to get some more sleep. Your body needs rest to heal." She closed her eyes obediently, but sleep did not come as quickly this time. She was too aware of him sitting there in the darkness, keeping watch over her like she was something precious rather than a despised orc who would be lucky to see the end of the season before being chased off to the next temporary home. It made her chest feel tight in a way that had nothing to do with the snake venom, and she did not know what to make of that feeling at all. The next days passed in a haze of pain and gradual healing. Declan came to check on her several times each day, changing her bandages and applying fresh poultice, bringing her meals on wooden trays and making sure she drank enough water. His mother, whose name Orla learned was Margaret, was cordially distant, bringing fresh linens and emptying the chamber pot, but never lingering to speak beyond what was strictly necessary. His father, Harold, did not come to the room at all, though Orla could sometimes hear his deep voice rumbling through the floorboards from the rooms below, and the tone was rarely pleased. On the third day, Orla insisted on trying to stand. Her leg was still swollen and tender, the bruising spreading in spectacular purple and green blooms across her calf, but the worst of the venom seemed to have worked its way out of her system, and she was tired of being bedridden. Declan watched with his arms crossed as she levered herself upright, his expression skeptical. "This is a bad idea," he said. "Noted." She gritted her teeth and put weight on her injured leg. It hurt, but it held, and she took one careful step, then another. Pride would not let her show weakness in front of him, so she forced herself to walk the length of the small room and back, though by the time she made it back to the bed sweat was beading on her forehead and her leg was shaking. "Satisfied?" he asked, and there was the faintest hint of amusement in his voice. "Very." She sat down more heavily than she intended, breathing hard. "You are the stubbornest patient I have ever had. I am Orc. We do not lie around feeling sorry for ourselves, clearly." He moved to check her bandages, unwinding the strips of cloth carefully. The wounds were healing cleanly, she could see, the angry red fading to pink, no signs of the infection that would have killed her as surely as the venom if he had not cleaned them so thoroughly. "How is the pain?" "Manageable." "That means it hurts like hell, but you are too proud to admit it." She glared at him, but there was no real heat in it. "You are learning." He smiled, a real smile this time that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face, making him look younger and lighter. Something fluttered in Orla's stomach that she firmly told herself was just residual nausea from the venom. "I brought you something," he said, reaching into the bag he had brought with him. He pulled out a crutch, roughly made but sturdy, the crosspiece wrapped in strips of cloth for padding. "Figured you would be trying to walk before I cleared you for it, so you might as well have proper support." She took the crutch, running her hands over the smooth wood. It was well made, the height exactly right for her, which meant he must have measured it against her while she slept. The thought of him taking such care, going to such trouble for her, made that strange tightness in her chest return. "Thank you," she said. "You did not have to do this. I know, I wanted to." Their eyes met and held for a moment too long, and Orla felt heat rising in her face that had nothing to do with fever. She looked away first, focusing her attention on the crutch, running her thumb over a slight imperfection in the wood grain. "I should let you rest," Declan said, standing up and gathering his supplies. "I will be back this evening with supper." After he left, Orla sat on the edge of the bed holding the crutch and trying to understand the unfamiliar emotions churning inside her. She had been alone for so long, cast out and wandering, taking whatever scraps of kindness the world offered and expecting nothing more. This sustained care, this attention to her needs and comfort, was so far outside her experience that she did not have a framework to process it. And the fact that it came from a human, someone who should by all rights despise her, or at best tolerate her as cheap labor, made it even more bewildering. She did not let herself think about the way her pulse jumped when he smiled at her, or the way she found herself listening for his footsteps in the hallway, or the strange disappointment she felt each time he left the room. Those thoughts led nowhere good, down paths that could only end in heartbreak and humiliation. By the 5th day, Orla was moving around the room with relative ease, the crutch bearing most of her weight but her injured leg growing stronger with each passing hour. She was standing at the window, looking out over the farm spread below, when she heard voices raised in argument from somewhere downstairs. She could not make out the words, but she recognized Declan's voice and his father's, both raised in anger. The door opened behind her, and Margaret entered carrying a tray. She set it down on the bedside table and then came to stand beside Orla at the window, following her gaze out to where Harold could be seen working in the barnyard below. "My husband is not a bad man," Margaret said quietly. "But he is a fearful one. He sees threats everywhere, especially in things he does not understand." "He sees an orc in his house and he is right to be afraid," Orla said. "My people have raided human settlements, killed humans. I do not blame him for his fear." "And have you killed anyone?" The question was blunt, direct, and Orla respected her for asking it straight out. "No. That is why my clan cast me out. I refuse to participate in violence against your people." Margaret nodded slowly. "Declan told me as much. He has a sense about people, my son. Always has, even as a boy. If he trusts you, that means something. He barely knows me. He knows enough. And he has not left your side for 5 days except to do the most essential chores. That is not like him. Declan keeps to himself mostly, does his work, does not get close to people." She turned to look at Orla directly, her gray eyes searching. "But he sees something in you. I just hope you are worthy of it." Before Orla could respond, Margaret walked back to the door. She paused with her hand on the frame and added, "The bandages and supplies are on the tray. Declan has been called to help with a problem in the North Field and will not be back until late. He asked if you would be comfortable changing your own dressing. I can help if you need it. I can manage, thank you." After Margaret left, Orla made her way over to the tray and examined the supplies. Everything was there, neatly arranged, including a small piece of folded paper that had not been there in previous days. She picked it up and unfolded it, recognizing Declan's strong, clear handwriting. "You are healing well. I am sorry I cannot be there to check on you today. Be careful with the leg. Rest more than you think you need to. I will see you tonight. D." It was a practical message, nothing more than a note from a caretaker to his patient. But Orla found herself reading it 3 times, tracing the letters with her fingertip, before carefully folding it and tucking it into the pocket of the clean dress Margaret had brought her days ago to replace her ruined work clothes. She changed her bandages carefully, pleased to see that the swelling had gone down considerably and the bite marks were scabbing over nicely. The bruising was still spectacular, but it no longer hurt unless she pressed directly on it. By her estimate, she would be able to return to light work within another few days, and back to full capacity within 2 weeks. She should have been relieved. Instead, she felt a strange reluctance at the thought of leaving this room, this unexpected sanctuary. That evening, true to his word, Declan returned just as the sun was setting. He looked exhausted, his clothes dirty and his hair disheveled, but his face lit up when he saw her sitting by the window. "You are looking stronger," he said, setting down a covered plate he had brought with him. "I am feeling stronger. What happened in the North Field?" he grimaced. "Fence break, worse than we thought. Took 6 of us most of the day to get it repaired properly. But it is done now." He pulled the chair over and sat down heavily, rolling his shoulders to work out the tension. Without thinking about what she was doing, Orla reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder. He froze at her touch, and she almost pulled away, suddenly aware of how inappropriate this was, how presumptuous. But then he relaxed slightly under her hand, and she felt bold enough to apply gentle pressure, working her fingers into the knotted muscles. He let out a long breath. "You do not have to do that," he said, but he made no move to pull away. "You have been taking care of me for days. Let me return the favor, even if it is only this much." She worked on his shoulders for several minutes, using the strength in her hands to loosen the tight muscles, and gradually she felt the tension leave his body. When she finally pulled away, he turned to look at her, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "Thank you," he said softly. "It was nothing." It was not nothing. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meanings she was afraid to examine too closely. She cleared her throat and gestured to the plate he had brought. "You should eat. You look like you have not stopped all day." "I have not, but this is for you." "I already ate what your mother brought at midday. That is yours." They argued about it for a few minutes, before finally compromising and splitting the food between them. Sitting together in the gathering darkness, and eating cold chicken and bread and cheese. It was such a simple thing, such an ordinary moment, but Orla found herself wanting to freeze time to hold onto this feeling of companionship and ease. "Can I ask you something?" Declan said after a while. "You can ask, I may not answer." "Fair enough." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "What was it like, being cast out from your clan?" It was not the question she had expected, and for a moment she considered deflecting, changing the subject. But there was genuine curiosity in his face, not the pruriently morbid kind but the kind that came from actually wanting to understand. So she took a breath and tried to put it into words. "It was like having my skin peeled off," she said quietly. "Orcs are communal. We live in clans, tight family groups, and your identity is tied up in your place within that structure. Being cast out means being made invisible, becoming a ghost. Other orcs will not speak to you, will not acknowledge your existence. You are dead to them, worse than dead. I have been wandering for 6 months now, taking work where I can find it, and every day I wake up feeling like I am missing a limb. Do you regret it? Refusing to participate in the raid?" "No." The answer came immediately with certainty. "The raid was against a farming village, families with children. I could not do it, could not be part of that kind of violence. My conscience is clear, even if the price was high." He nodded slowly. "That takes courage. Real courage, not the battlefield kind. The kind that is about standing by your principles even when it costs you everything. Some would call it foolishness. Some would be wrong." They fell silent after that, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that comes when two people are at ease in each other's company. Eventually Declan stood and stretched, stifling a yawn. "I should go and let you sleep. Do you need anything before I leave?" "No. But Declan." He turned back to look at her. "Thank you. Not just for tonight, but for everything. I know I have said it before, but I want you to know I mean it. You saved my life, and you have shown me more kindness than I have known in a long time. I will not forget it." Something shifted in his expression, something warm and complicated. "You are welcome, Orla. Sleep well." After he left, Orla lay in the darkness and replayed the evening in her mind, analyzing every word, every gesture. She was in dangerous territory now, she knew that. Feelings were developing that had no place existing, attachments forming that could only lead to pain. She was an orc, an outcast, a temporary worker who would be moving on as soon as the harvest was done. And he was a human, the son of a man who barely tolerated her presence, living in a world that saw her as monstrous. But when she closed her eyes, it was his face she saw, his voice she heard, And when she finally drifted off to sleep, it was with a smile on her lips that she would have been horrified to admit to anyone. The next week passed in a strange, suspended state that felt almost like a dream. Orla continued to heal, growing stronger each day, and Declan continued to visit her regularly, bringing meals and fresh bandages, and increasingly staying longer just to talk. They spoke about everything and nothing. His childhood on the farm, her life in the clan before the exile, their thoughts on the crops and the weather and the changing of the seasons. He told her about the dreams he had once had of leaving the farm, seeing more of the world, but how those dreams had faded when his older brother died of fever 3 years ago, and the responsibility of the farm had fallen to him. She told him about the orc traditions she missed, the festivals and songs, the way her people honored their ancestors and found joy in simple things. Sometimes Margaret would find them in the evening, sitting close together by the window, their heads bent in conversation, and she would stand in the doorway for a moment before announcing her presence. Her expression was always difficult to read, somewhere between concern and something that might have been grudging approval. Harold, on the other hand, made his disapproval abundantly clear on the few occasions when Orla encountered him. She had started moving around the house more as her strength returned, using the crutch to make her way downstairs to take some air on the porch, and twice she had nearly collided with him in the hallway. Both times he had looked at her with undisguised hostility, his jaw clenched tight, before stalking away without a word. "Do not mind my father," Declan said when she mentioned it to him. "He is angry at me, not you. He thinks I am being reckless, foolish, risking the family's reputation." "He is not wrong." "Yes, he is." Declan's voice was firm. "Showing basic human decency to someone in need is never foolish, regardless of what species they happen to be." "Human decency," Orla repeated with a slight emphasis on the first word. He had the grace to look embarrassed. "You know what I mean." "I do. But your father has a point about the risk. Other humans will not look kindly on this, on you spending time with an orc, treating her like an equal." "Then let them not look kindly. I have never much cared what the neighbors think." His defiance warmed her even as it worried her. She did not want to be the cause of conflict between him and his family, did not want to bring trouble down on the people who had sheltered her. But she also could not deny the fierce pleasure she felt at his defense of her, at his willingness to stand against prejudice on her behalf. 2 weeks after the snake bite, Orla woke to find that the pain in her leg had faded to a dull background ache that was easy to ignore. She tested her weight on it carefully and found that it held firm with only minimal twinges. The crutch was no longer necessary. She was healed, or as close to it as made no difference, which meant she was out of excuses to stay in this room, to remain in this strange liminal space where she was neither worker nor guest, but something undefined. When Declan came to check on her that morning, she told him she was ready to return to work. He frowned, examining her leg carefully. "Are you sure? You could use another few days of rest." "I am sure. I have been idle long enough. Your father has been more than generous in allowing me to recover here, but the harvest season is in full swing and you need all hands working." "My father," Declan said slowly, "can manage without you for a while longer if needed. But I cannot manage without work. I need to earn my keep, Declan. I cannot keep taking your family's charity." "It is not charity." "Then what is it?" The question hung between them, challenging, and she saw him struggle with how to answer it. What was it, this arrangement they had fallen into? What were they to each other, this human and this orc, beyond the simple categories of caretaker and patient? "It is what anyone would do," he finally said, but the words lacked conviction. "We both know that is not true." He sighed and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of his frustration. "All right. Yes, you are probably ready to return to light work, but you stay out of the far fields for now. I want you where I can keep an eye on you, make sure you are not overdoing it." "I do not need a nursemaid." "Too bad, you have one anyway." She wanted to argue, but the concern in his eyes made her protest die unspoken. "Fine, light work close to the house, satisfied." "Barely." That afternoon, Orla returned to the workers' quarters in the barn for the first time since the snake bite. The space was rough but functional, a loft area above the animal stalls where the seasonal workers slept on straw mattresses and kept their few belongings. There were 5 others sharing the space currently. 3 human men who had been traveling together and looking for harvest work, and 2 orc women from a different clan who regarded Orla with the cold indifference reserved for outcasts. She had forgotten how harsh this existence was, how different from the clean comfort of the guest room. The straw was scratchy, the air thick with the smell of animals and unwashed bodies, the rough voices of the men drifting up from below as they played dice and drank cheap ale. She lay on her mattress and stared up at the dark beams of the barn roof and told herself that this was reality, that the past 2 weeks had been an aberration, a temporary kindness that was never meant to last. The work started the next day. Declan had assigned her to help with the vegetable garden near the house, harvesting the late summer produce and preparing the beds for fall planting. It was easy work, well within her capabilities, and she was grateful for his consideration even as part of her chafed at the special treatment. The other workers were out in the wheat fields from dawn to dusk, doing the back-breaking work of harvesting the grain, while she pulled carrots and beans like a child given a gentle task. But it allowed her to stay close to the house, which meant she saw Declan throughout the day as he moved between various tasks. He always found an excuse to stop by the garden, to check on her progress, or bring her water, or simply exchange a few words. She knew the other workers noticed, knew they were talking about it in the barn at night when she pretended to be asleep. The human men made crude jokes about orc women and what a man might want with one, while the orc women muttered darkly about outcasts who brought shame to their entire race by consorting with humans. Orla tried to keep her distance, tried to establish proper boundaries between herself and Declan, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. He sought her out constantly, found reasons to work near the garden, stayed talking to her long after any legitimate business was concluded. And she, weak fool that she was, welcomed it every time, hoarding each interaction like a miser hoarding gold. 3 weeks after the snake bite, the first real cold snap of autumn arrived, bringing with it a wind that cut like a knife and the promise of an early frost. Orla was working in the garden, trying to get the last of the tender plants harvested before the freeze killed them, when Declan appeared with 2 steaming mugs. "Hot cider," he said, handing her one. "Figured you could use something warm." She accepted it gratefully, wrapping her hands around the mug and breathing in the sweet, spiced steam. They stood together in the gathering dusk, watching the sun sink below the horizon in a blaze of orange and gold. "Winter comes early this far north," he said. "Another month and the harvest will be done. Most of the seasonal workers will move on, head south to warmer climates." Her chest tightened. "Yes, I suppose I will as well, or you could stay." She turned to look at him, not quite believing what she had heard. "Stay." "We always keep 1 or 2 workers on through the winter. Light maintenance, animal care, that sort of thing. The pay is not much, but it includes room and board, and it is steadier than wandering." He was not looking at her, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I thought if you wanted, you could be one of them this year. Your father would never agree to that." My father does not make all the decisions around here, regardless of what he thinks. I manage the workers. It is my choice who stays and who goes. Declan. She waited until he turned to face her. Why are you doing this? Because you are a good worker. Because we could use someone with your strength and reliability. That is not a reason to defy your father's wishes. No, he admitted, it is not. Then why? He met her eyes directly, and in that moment she saw everything he was trying not to say written plainly on his face. The longing, the conflict, the desperate hope. It mirrored everything she had been feeling and trying to suppress for weeks now. Because I do not want you to leave, he said simply. Because the thought of you walking away at the end of the season and me never seeing you again makes me feel like I cannot breathe. Because I look forward to seeing you every day, and when I am not with you, I am thinking about when I will be with you next. Because you make me laugh, and you challenge me, and you are the most interesting person I have met in my entire life. He paused, then added more quietly, because I think I might be falling in love with you, and I do not care that you are an orc or that it is forbidden, or that everyone will think I have lost my mind. I just care that you are here and I want you to stay. The world seemed to stop spinning. Orla stood frozen, the mug of cider cooling in her hands, trying to process what she had just heard. He loved her. This human man, this impossible, wonderful, infuriating man loved her. You cannot, she whispered. Too late. Declan, this is madness. We have no future together. Your family will disown you. The community will shun you. My people will see me as even more of a traitor than they already do. This cannot work. Why not? Because the world will not let it. The world can go to hell. He stepped closer, and she could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cold air. I know this is complicated. I know there will be challenges. But I also know what I feel, and I know what I have seen in your eyes when you look at me. Tell me I am wrong. Tell me you do not feel anything for me, and I will let this go. We'll keep things strictly professional. But if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then we owe it to ourselves to at least try. She wanted to lie. Wanted to tell him that he was mistaken, that she saw him as nothing more than an employer, that she felt nothing beyond gratitude for his help. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing, the thing that would protect them both from future pain. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was the truth. I do feel it, she said, her voice breaking. I feel it every time you walk into a room and every time you leave. I feel it when you smile at me and when you say my name. I feel it so strongly that it terrifies me because I know how badly this could end, how much it could hurt when everything falls apart. What if it does not fall apart? It will. Things like this always do. Not always. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she did not, he cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing over her cheek. Not if we are willing to fight for it. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite herself, feeling the last of her resistance crumbling. Your family will hate me. My mother already likes you, I can tell. My father will come around eventually. He is stubborn but not stupid. The other orcs will see me as an even greater outcast. You have already been cast out. You have already paid the price of standing by your principles. Do not let their judgment stop you from being happy. I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to be in a relationship, especially not one so complicated. Neither do I. We will figure it out together. She opened her eyes and found him watching her with such tender intensity that it made her heart ache. Slowly, giving him every chance to change his mind, she reached up and covered his hand with her own, holding it against her face. If we do this, she said, there is no going back. Once we cross this line, everything changes. I know. Your life will be harder, people will talk, there will be consequences. I do not care you should care, but I do not." He smiled, that warm smile that transformed his face, and she felt something in her chest finally give way, the wall she had built around her heart cracking open. "All I care about is you. So what do you say, Orla Nightshade? Will you stay? Will you give us a chance?" For a long moment she stood there, balanced on the knife edge of decision, feeling the weight of everything that could go wrong pressing down on her. But she also felt the warmth of his hand on her face, the steadiness of his presence, the hope that maybe, just maybe, something could go right for once. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will stay." The joy that lit up his face was worth every risk, every consequence that might follow. He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, pressing her face against his chest and breathing in the scent of him, earth and wood smoke, and something indefinably masculine. His heart was pounding beneath her ear, as fast as her own, and she knew that he was just as terrified and exhilarated as she was. They stood there in the darkening garden, holding each other as the temperature dropped, and the first stars began to appear overhead. And Orla let herself believe, for the first time in a very long time, that maybe she had found a place where she belonged. The next weeks were a strange mix of bliss and tension. Publicly, Orla and Declan maintained a careful distance, their interactions limited to what was appropriate between an employer and a worker. But privately, whenever they could steal a few moments alone, they were together, talking and laughing and slowly learning the contours of this new relationship they had embarked upon. Declan would find excuses to walk her back to the barn after the evening meal, and they would take the long way around, holding hands in the darkness and stealing quick kisses in the shadows of buildings. He brought her small gifts, things he had made or found. A smooth stone from the creek bed that fit perfectly in her palm, a carved wooden comb for her hair, a warm scarf for the increasingly cold mornings. She, in turn, shared the parts of her culture that she could, teaching him phrases in the Orcish language, telling him the old stories her grandmother had told her as a child, showing him the traditional patterns she could weave with simple materials. Margaret noticed, of course. Mothers always did. She did not say anything directly, but Orla would catch her watching them sometimes with an expression that was equal parts worried and wistful. Harold remained oblivious, or perhaps he simply chose not to see what was happening right under his nose, too busy with the demands of the harvest to pay attention to his son's private life. The other workers definitely noticed. The human men's jokes took on a more pointed, ugly tone, and Orla ignored them with the practice of someone who had endured far worse. The orc women stopped speaking to her entirely, treating her as completely invisible, which actually made life easier in the cramped quarters of the barn loft. Then came the night that everything changed. Orla was alone in the barn, the other workers having gone into town for the evening to spend their wages on drink and entertainment. She was sitting on her mattress, mending a tear in her work shirt by the light of a single lantern, when she heard footsteps on the ladder. She looked up expecting to see Declan, since he had mentioned he might try to steal a few minutes with her if he could slip away from the evening chores. But it was not Declan. 3 men emerged into the loft, and even though their faces were shadowed, she recognized them as workers from a neighboring farm. She had seen them in town on market days, had heard their loud voices in the tavern, had felt their eyes following her with expressions that made her skin crawl. They were drunk now, she could tell from the way they moved, and there was an ugliness in their body language that set off every warning bell in her head. "Well, look what we have here," the largest one said, his words slurring slightly. "The orc that thinks she is good enough for a human man." Orla set down her mending slowly and got to her feet, assessing the situation. 3 of them, one of her, the ladder at their backs, blocking her easiest exit. Plenty of space to maneuver in the loft, but also plenty of potential weapons in the form of pitchforks and other tools hanging on the walls. "You are on private property," she said, keeping her voice level. "Leave now and there will be no trouble." "No trouble? That is funny coming from an orc." The man took a step closer. "We have been hearing stories about you and the Fisher boy. Thought we would come see for ourselves what all the fuss was about. What is it you got that makes a human man forget his own kind? Declan's choices are his own business and none of yours. Leave. Now." "Or what? You will tell on us." One of the other men laughed, a nasty sound. "Who is going to believe an orc over 3 upstanding human men? We are just here to put you in your place, teach you what happens when your kind gets ideas above their station." They spread out, trying to surround her, and Orla shifted her stance, balancing her weight evenly. She had not wanted this, had spent months avoiding exactly this kind of confrontation, but she was not helpless and she was not going to let herself be victimized. If they wanted a fight, she would give them one. The big man lunged first, and she sidestepped easily, using his momentum against him to send him stumbling past her. The second man was smarter, coming in low and trying to grapple, but she brought her knee up hard and he went down with a wheeze. The third man hesitated, suddenly looking less certain now that he saw how quickly his friends had been dispatched. But the big man was back on his feet, rage overcoming his drunkenness, and this time when he came at her, he had a piece of wood in his hand, a broken handle from some tool. She tried to dodge, but the loft was too cramped, too full of obstacles, and the wood caught her across the shoulders with bruising force. She stumbled, and that was all the opening they needed. The fight that followed was brutal and ugly. Orla fought with everything she had, landing blows that would have incapacitated smaller opponents. But these were large men with the advantages of numbers and alcohol-fueled aggression. They dragged her down, and she was vaguely aware of shouting, of more footsteps on the ladder. And then suddenly the weight was lifted off her as someone hauled her attackers back with shocking violence. Declan. He was a fury incarnate, his face twisted with rage as he threw one man bodily across the loft and punched another so hard that blood sprayed from the man's nose. The third man tried to run, but Declan caught him by the collar and slammed him against the wall hard enough to rattle his teeth. "You dare," Declan snarled, his voice barely recognizable. "You dare come onto my property and attack someone under my protection. She is just an orc," the man whimpered. "She is worth 10 of you." Declan hit him again, and the man's head snapped back. "You have 10 seconds to get off this farm before I forget I am a civilized man and beat you to death with my bare hands. And if I ever see you anywhere near her again, I will not be so merciful. Do you understand me?" The men scrambled for the ladder, supporting their injured companion between them, and fled into the night. Declan stood there breathing hard, his fists still clenched, watching them go. Then he turned to where Orla was pulling herself upright, and his expression transformed from rage to concern in an instant. "Are you hurt?" He crossed to her in 2 quick strides, his hands gentle now as they moved over her, checking for injuries. "I am fine. Bruised, but fine." She caught his hands, stilling them. "Thank you. If you had not arrived when you did. Do not finish that sentence." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "I heard the noise from the barn and came running, I thought. God, Orla, I thought I might be too late. But you were not. You saved me. Again." He pulled back enough to look at her face, and she saw that his hands were shaking. "This is my fault. I should have known that being open about my feelings for you would make you a target. I should have protected you better. This is not your fault. Those men made their choices. The hatred is theirs, not yours, but you are paying the price for it. She cupped his face in her hands, feeling the stubble rough against her palms. Declan, look at me. I knew there would be consequences to this. We both did. This changes nothing. It changes everything. I cannot keep you safe here, not if people know about us. And after tonight, word will spread. Then what are you suggesting? He took a deep breath, and she saw him come to some internal decision. Marry me. For the second time in her life, Orla felt the world stop spinning beneath her feet. What? Marry me, he repeated, and now his voice was steady, certain. If you are my wife, you will be under my protection officially. You will have rights that hired workers do not. It will not stop all the hatred, but it will make it harder for people to act on it. Declan, you cannot be serious. We have been together for less than a month. Marriage is a huge step. I know. And I am completely serious. I told you I was falling in love with you. I have finished falling, Orla. I love you completely and entirely. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to face whatever the world throws at us together. And yes, I know it is fast, and yes, I know it is unconventional, but nothing about us has been conventional from the start. So what do you say? She stared at him, this impossible man who had turned her entire world upside down, and felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. You are completely insane. Is that a yes? Your father will disown you, probably. The community will never accept me. Some will. The ones who matter, and the rest can go to hell. We will face prejudice and hatred, and people will try to tear us apart. Let them try, they will fail. You are throwing away your entire life for me. No. He leaned his forehead against hers, his eyes intense. I am choosing the life I want, the life that matters. I am choosing you. Now please, for the love of all that is holy, tell me if you are going to say yes, or if I need to keep making arguments, because I have about 100 more prepared. A laugh bubbled up from her chest, surprising her with its lightness. You have 100 arguments prepared, at least. I have been planning this speech for days. Admittedly, I thought I would give it in a more romantic setting, maybe by the creek at sunset or something, but you nearly getting attacked by drunken bigots seemed as good a time as any to ask. Your sense of timing is terrible. That is not an answer. She pulled back enough to look at him properly. This human man who had saved her life, who had nursed her back to health, who had defended her against his own kind, who was now offering her everything he had despite all the reasons they should not work. And she knew with a certainty that went bone deep that he was her future, her home, her everything. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. His whoop of joy was loud enough to wake the animals in the stalls below, and then he was spinning her around, laughing like a child, and she was laughing too, dizzy with relief and happiness and terror and hope all mixed together in an intoxicating cocktail. When he finally set her down, he kissed her properly for the first time, and it was everything she had imagined and more. His lips were soft but insistent, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious, and she melted into him, into this moment, into the promise of all the moments to come. They spent the rest of the night in the barn, talking about the future they would build together, making plans, dreaming out loud. By the time the sun rose, they had decided everything. They would marry as soon as the harvest was done, a simple ceremony with whatever witnesses they could find who would attend. They would remain on the farm for now, since it was Declan's inheritance and his responsibility, but if Harold made life too difficult, they would be prepared to leave and start over somewhere else. They would face each challenge as it came, together. Telling Margaret and Harold was every bit as difficult as Orla had anticipated. They called a family meeting the next evening, and the atmosphere in the farmhouse parlor was tense enough to cut with a knife. "Absolutely not," Harold said, the moment Declan finished explaining their intentions. "I will not allow it. It is bad enough that you have been consorting with an orc, but to actually marry one. You will make us the laughingstock of the entire county." "I am not asking your permission, Father. I am informing you of my decision as a courtesy." "A courtesy? You call this a courtesy, telling me you are going to throw your life away on a beast?" "Do not call her that." Declan's voice was dangerously quiet. "What else would you have me call her? She is an orc, boy, not human. Not one of us. Your children, if you are cursed enough to have any, will be half-breeds belonging nowhere, accepted by no one. Have you thought about that?" "I have thought about everything, and my decision stands." Harold turned to his wife, his face red with anger. "Margaret, talk some sense into him." But Margaret was looking at Orla, her expression thoughtful. After a long moment she spoke. "Tell me honestly, girl, do you love my son?" Orla met her eyes directly. "I do, with everything I am." "And will you be faithful to him, stand by him, make a good home?" "I will, I swear it. Even when times are hard, even when people are cruel, even when you face prejudice and hatred, especially then. I have already been cast out once for standing by my principles. I will not falter now." Margaret nodded slowly, then she turned to her husband. "She will do, Harold." "What?" "I said she will do. She is strong, hardworking, loyal, and she makes our son happy. I have seen the way he looks at her, the way he lights up when she is near. That is worth more than the opinions of narrow-minded neighbors." "Have you lost your mind, woman?" "No. But I nearly lost my son to grief when Thomas died. Do you remember how dark he was, how he withdrew from everything? I have not seen him truly smile in 3 years, not until she came into his life. If she makes him happy, if she gives him a reason to hope again, then I will not stand in their way." She turned to Declan and Orla. "You have my blessing. It will not be easy, and I cannot promise I will not worry myself sick, but you have my blessing." Declan crossed the room and hugged his mother fiercely. "Thank you, Ma." Harold stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Fine. Do what you want, but do not expect me to celebrate this madness, and do not come crying to me when it all falls apart." He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Margaret sighed. "Give him time. He is stubborn and set in his ways, but he is not cruel. He will come around eventually." "And if he does not?" Orla asked quietly. "Then he will miss out on knowing his daughter-in-law, and that will be his loss." Margaret came over and took Orla's hands in hers. "Welcome to the family, dear, such as it is." The wedding took place on a crisp autumn morning 2 weeks later, just as the last of the harvest was being brought in. It was a small ceremony, held in the farmhouse parlor with Margaret and 2 of the more open-minded neighbors as witnesses. The local priest had refused to officiate, so they had to bring in a traveling minister who was known for his more progressive views. Orla wore a simple dress that Margaret had made for her, dark green fabric that complemented her skin, with delicate embroidery around the collar in traditional orc patterns that Orla had taught her. Declan wore his best clothes, his dark hair combed back and his face clean-shaven. He could not stop smiling, and every time their eyes met Orla felt her heart swell almost painfully in her chest. The ceremony itself was brief. They exchanged simple vows, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived, through whatever challenges came their way. Declan slipped a ring onto her finger, a simple band of silver that had belonged to his grandmother, and she gave him a braided cord she had woven from her own hair, an orc tradition signifying the binding of 2 lives into one. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Declan kissed her to the applause of their small audience, and Orla felt something settle in her chest, a rightness that she had been searching for her entire life without knowing it. The celebration afterward was modest. Just a good meal that Margaret had prepared and a few bottles of wine that the neighbors had brought. Harold was conspicuously absent, having taken himself off to town on some invented errand, but his absence was noted and quietly mourned. Still, the mood was joyful despite the shadow of his disapproval, and as the afternoon wore on into evening, Orla found herself relaxing in a way she never had before, surrounded by people who were choosing to accept her, to welcome her into their community despite all the reasons they could have used to reject her. That night, for the first time, she and Declan shared a bed as husband and wife in the small room that had been his since childhood. It felt strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once, this new intimacy, but they took their time, learning each other slowly. And when they finally came together, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to Orla's eyes. Afterward, lying in the darkness with her head on his chest and his arms wrapped around her, she felt truly safe for the first time since her exile. This was home now, she realized. Not the farm, not the room, but this man, this human who had chosen her against all logic and social convention. Wherever he was, that was where she belonged. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," he murmured back, his breath stirring her hair. "My wife." The word sent a thrill through her. Wife. She was someone's wife. She belonged to someone and they belonged to her. A mutual choosing that felt like the most revolutionary thing in the world. The winter that followed was hard, but not in the ways Orla had feared. The work was manageable, the food adequate, the shelter warm. But the social consequences of their marriage were significant. Most of the neighbors stopped speaking to the Fishers entirely, and those who did speak to them made their disapproval clear through cold tones and clipped conversations. The local shops charged them higher prices, and invitations to social gatherings dried up completely. Harold remained distant and disapproving, speaking to Orla only when absolutely necessary and treating her presence in his home like a personal affront. But he did not drive them out, and Orla knew that was at least partially thanks to Margaret's influence. The older woman had become something of an unexpected ally, defending Orla to the neighbors and slowly, patiently working on her husband to soften his stance. For their part, Orla and Declan built their life together one day at a time. They worked side by side during the days, maintaining the farm through the quiet winter months, and spent their evenings by the fire, talking and planning and simply enjoying each other's company. Declan taught Orla to read and write in the common tongue, patiently guiding her through the letters until she could sound out simple passages. She taught him more of her language and culture, sharing the songs and stories that she had been afraid were lost forever when she was cast out. There were hard days, days when the isolation and prejudice wore on them both, when they snapped at each other over small things or sat in heavy silence, each absorbed in their own worries. But they always came back together, always talked through their difficulties, always recommitted to their choice to be together. Spring came eventually, as spring always does, bringing with it the promise of renewal and new beginnings. The farm burst into life, and with it came the need for more workers to handle the planting. Harold managed the hiring, and Orla was not surprised when he made sure to hire only humans, most of whom made their discomfort with her presence abundantly clear. But there was one surprise. Among the new workers was a young orc man named Grath, who had apparently heard about the farm that employed orcs and was looking for work. Harold tried to turn him away, but Declan overruled him, and suddenly, Orla was no longer the only orc on the property. Grath was wary of her at first, having heard that she was married to a human, and not sure what to make of such an aberration. But Orla was so starved for any connection to her own culture that she made an effort to befriend him, speaking to him in their native language and sharing meals when she could. Slowly, he began to warm to her, and eventually he admitted that he too had been cast out from his clan, though for different reasons than hers. "I am glad I am not the only exile anymore," Orla told him one evening as they sat outside the barn watching the sunset. "We make our own clan," Grath said with a slight smile. "The clan of the cast-offs and misfits. I will drink to that." Having Grath on the farm made the summer easier. Orla had someone to speak her own language with, someone who understood the particular kind of loneliness that came from being separated from your people. And Declan, seeing how much happier his wife was with another orc nearby, made sure to give them time to spend together, never once showing jealousy or insecurity about their friendship. As the months passed, the community's hostility did not fade, but it did settle into something more like grudging tolerance. The Fishers were still outsiders now, tainted by their association with orcs, but they were not actively threatened anymore. People had their own lives to worry about, their own problems to solve, and eventually the scandal of Declan and Orla's marriage became old news, replaced by newer gossip. Harold finally began to thaw in late summer, nearly a year after the wedding. It started small, with him actually responding when Orla greeted him in the mornings, progressed to him asking her opinion about farm matters, and culminated one evening when he actually sat down to dinner with her and Declan, and engaged in something approaching pleasant conversation. "You work hard," he said grudgingly, as close to a compliment as he had ever given her. "I will give you that." "Thank you," Orla said carefully, not sure where this was going. "And you have been good for my son. He is happier than I have seen him in years." Declan reached over and took Orla's hand, squeezing it gently. She squeezed back, a silent communication passing between them. "I still do not understand it," Harold continued. "I probably never will, but I can see that this is real what you have, and I am tired of fighting it." He looked directly at Orla for the first time in months. "You are family now, I suppose. Might as well start treating you like it." It was not a heartfelt apology or a grand gesture of acceptance, but coming from Harold it was huge. Orla felt her eyes burning with unshed tears. "Thank you," she managed to say. "That means more than you know." Margaret, who had been watching this exchange with barely concealed delight, got up and hugged her husband fiercely. "Finally! I thought I was going to have to beat some sense into you." "You have been beating sense into me for 30 years, woman. I am surprised there is any sense left." The laughter that followed was warm and genuine, and Orla felt another piece of her armor fall away, another wall that she had built around her heart crumbling. This was what family felt like, she realized. Not perfect, not without its struggles, but real and solid and choosing to love each other despite the difficulties. That autumn brought news that changed everything. Orla realized she had missed her monthly cycle twice in a row, and with that realization came a mixture of terror and joy so intense she could barely function. A child. She was going to have a child. Declan's child. A half-human, half-orc child that would belong fully to neither world, and yet would be wholly theirs. She told Declan that evening, stumbling over the words in her nervousness, and his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around just like he had the night he proposed, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy, Orla, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and thrilled and so in love with you I could burst. A baby. Our baby." They told Margaret and Harold over dinner that night, and Margaret immediately burst into tears of joy, already planning and fussing about what they would need to prepare. Harold, to everyone's surprise, actually smiled, a real genuine smile that transformed his usually stern face. "A grandchild," he said wonderingly. "I am going to be a grandfather. The baby will be half orc," Orla felt compelled to point out. "Some might not consider it a real grandchild." "Then some are fools," Harold said firmly. "It will be my grandchild, my blood and my son's, and I will be damned if I let anyone say otherwise." Hearing those words from the man who had fought so hard against their marriage, Orla finally let herself believe that everything might actually be all right. The baby would face challenges, that was inevitable, but it would also have a family that loved it, parents who had chosen each other despite impossible odds, and a community that was slowly, grudgingly, learning to expand its definition of what family could mean. The pregnancy was not easy. Orla's body was strong, but carrying a half-human child put strains on her that a full orc pregnancy would not have. She was sick constantly in the early months, and as the baby grew, she developed aches and pains in places she had not known could hurt. But Declan was attentive throughout, bringing her whatever she needed, rubbing her feet when they swelled, holding her hair back when she was sick, never once complaining about the disruption to their lives. Winter came again, their second as a married couple, and with it came the slow waiting for the baby to arrive. Margaret had helped deliver dozens of babies over the years, both human and animal, and she assured Orla that she would be fine, that mixed births were rare but not unheard of, and usually proceeded normally. The baby came on a snowy night in late winter, after hours of exhausting labor that left Orla wrung out and certain she could not possibly survive another contraction. But she did survive, and when she heard the baby's first cry, she felt a rush of love so powerful it nearly knocked her over even lying down. "A boy," Margaret announced, wrapping the baby in soft blankets. "A beautiful, healthy boy." She placed the baby in Orla's arms, and Orla looked down at her son in wonder. He was small and wrinkled and perfect, with a dusting of dark hair and eyes that were still unfocused. His skin was a color between her green and Declan's tan, a unique shade that would mark him as mixed forever. He had tiny tusks just beginning to emerge and slightly pointed ears, and hands that were neither fully human nor fully orc, but something in between. Declan sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, and together they marveled at this new life they had created. "He is perfect," Declan whispered. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at her son, Orla knew exactly what his name should be. "Darius," she said. "After your brother, Declan Fisher Nightshade." "To honor both our families." Declan's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas would have loved that, and I love it. Darius it is." Harold and Margaret came in to meet their grandson shortly after, and the love on their faces as they looked at the baby erased any lingering doubts Orla might have had about their acceptance. This child was wanted, loved, and would grow up knowing he belonged somewhere, which was more than either of his parents could say about their own childhoods. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings, and the strange, intense joy of watching a new person begin to discover the world. Darius was a happy baby, quick to smile and curious about everything, and he captured hearts wherever he went. Even some of the neighbors who had been most hostile to Orla and Declan's marriage found their ice melting when presented with an adorable baby to coo over. Grath, who was still working on the farm, became something of an unofficial uncle to Darius, teaching him words in Orcish before he could even understand what they meant and carving him toys from wood. Margaret was a doting grandmother, constantly making clothes and blankets for the baby and offering advice that was sometimes helpful and sometimes needed to be politely ignored. Even Harold, gruff and awkward with emotions, could be found playing with his grandson in the evenings, making funny faces to elicit those precious baby giggles. As spring came and Darius approached his first birthday, Orla and Declan stood together on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over the fields that had become their home. The baby was asleep in Margaret's arms inside, and for a moment they had stolen just for themselves. "Do you ever regret it?" Orla asked quietly. "Everything you gave up to be with me." Declan pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Not for a single second. Every challenge, every hardship, every moment of prejudice or difficulty has been worth it to have you and Darius in my life. You are my family, Orla. You are my home." "I love you," she said, the words still feeling new and precious even after 2 years of marriage. "I love you too. Always have, always will." They stood together in the fading light. Two people from different worlds who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together despite every obstacle, who had created new life and new possibilities simply by refusing to let the world tell them no. Behind them was a house full of family, imperfect but loving. Before them stretched years of possibility, challenges to face and joys to share. And in that moment, Orla knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The snake bite that had brought them together had seemed like a death sentence at the time, but it had actually been the beginning of everything that mattered. Because Declan had sucked the venom from her wound and nursed her through that long night, she had lived. And because she had lived, they had loved. And because they had loved, they had created not just a child but a future where perhaps someday the barriers between their peoples might begin to fall. It was not a perfect ending, because life was never perfect. There would be more struggles ahead, more prejudice to face, more battles to fight. But they would face them together, with love and stubbornness, and the unshakable belief that what they had was worth defending. And that, Orla thought as she leaned into her husband's warmth and listened to the sounds of their family inside, was more than enough. That was everything. Years passed, and the Fisher farm became something of an anomaly in the region, a place where humans and orcs worked side by side, where interspecies families were not just tolerated but celebrated. Darius grew into a bright, energetic child who moved easily between both worlds, learning human customs from his father and grandparents while absorbing orc traditions from his mother and Grath. He faced his share of teasing and prejudice from other children, but he also found friends who looked past his mixed heritage to see the person he was, and he grew strong and confident in his unique identity. Orla and Declan had 2 more children over the years, a daughter they named Olivia, who had her father's gray eyes and her mother's determination, and another son they called David, who was more thoughtful and artistic than his adventurous older brother. The house was full and loud and chaotic, exactly the way a home should be, and the love that filled it was palpable to anyone who entered. Harold passed away when Darius was 10, and while his relationship with Orla had never been entirely without complications, she mourned him genuinely as the man who had eventually opened his heart to her and her children. Margaret lived on for many more years, becoming the matriarch of their expanding family and the keeper of their stories, making sure the grandchildren knew where they came from and why their family was special. Other mixed families began to appear in the region as time went on, emboldened by the example of the Fishers, and slowly, incrementally, attitudes began to shift. It was not a sudden revolution, but a gradual evolution. each mixed couple and each child of two worlds chipping away at the old prejudices and building new possibilities. And through it all, Orla and Declan remained at the center of their family, their love the foundation on which everything else was built. They had their disagreements and their difficult days, as any couple does over the course of a long marriage, but they never forgot what they had fought for, never took for granted the life they had built together. On their 25th wedding anniversary, they stood once again on that porch where they had spent so many evenings, now surrounded by their grown children and their grandchildren, with friends both human and orc gathered to celebrate. The farm had prospered over the years, and with it, their family had grown and thrived. "Thank you," Orla said to her husband, the words encompassing everything they had been through together. "For what?" Declan asked, though the smile on his face said he knew exactly what she meant. "For sucking the venom from my leg and nursing me through that night. For seeing me as a person and not a monster. For loving me when it was hard and unpopular and difficult. For giving me a family and a home and a reason to believe in the possibility of change." He pulled her close, and she went willingly, fitting against him as naturally as she had that first time he had held her in the wheat field. "Thank you for letting me save you, for staying when you could have left, for building this life with me, for showing me what real love looks like." Their children and grandchildren applauded, calling for a speech, but Orla and Declan just laughed and waved them off. They did not need speeches or grand pronouncements. They had lived their truth every day for 25 years, had proven through their actions and their choices that love could transcend boundaries and break down walls. As the party continued around them, music and laughter filling the warm summer air, Orla thought back to that day in the wheat field when a snake had struck her calf, and she had been certain she was going to die. She thought about the human man who had refused to let that happen, who had put his mouth to her wound and drawn out the poison, who had carried her to safety and stayed by her side through the long night that followed. That act of mercy had saved her life, but more than that, it had given her life meaning. It had led to love and family and belonging, to children who would carry both their heritages forward into a future that was brighter than either of them could have imagined on that desperate day. She looked at Declan, her husband of 25 years, her partner in every adventure, the father of her children and the keeper of her heart, and she knew that she would do it all again. Every challenge, every hardship, every moment of prejudice or pain. Because it had led here, to this moment, to this family, to this love that had proven stronger than all the forces arrayed against it. And as the sun set over the farm that had become their sanctuary and their legacy, Orla Nightshade Fisher took her husband's hand and knew, with every fiber of her being, that she was home.